Week 9 is in the books, so that means it's time to hit those waiver wires to find players that can add value to the back end of your rosters. And quick note, I am going to be referencing rostership percentages in this video, and those are coming from roster data from 1,700 Dynasty leagues on MFL. Basically, a 50-50 split of one quarterback in Superflex, all with a minimum of 20-man rosters. So I'm not pulling these guys out of nowhere, but it is possible that some or even all of these guys are already rostering in leagues. But for the most part, there are hundreds of leagues out there where these guys are available on waivers right now. First off, I want to highlight a couple players that are highly rostered, but not exactly 100% rostered that I think need to be, and that includes Taylor Heineke, quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons, Josh Dobbs, the man himself, quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings, Chase Brown, running back for the Cincinnati Bengals, Demario Douglas, wide receiver for the New England Patriots, Odell Beckham Jr., wide receiver for the Baltimore Ravens, Jonnu Smith, tight end for the Atlanta Falcons, and Cade Otton, tight end for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Again, all guys that are rostered in well over 95% of Dynasty leagues out there, but not exactly 100%. So double check your waiver wires, immediately add those guys if they are available. All right, now perhaps the biggest waiver wire pickup of the week, Keaton Mitchell splashed onto the scene for the Baltimore Ravens in a big way. 9 carries, 138 yards, and a touchdown. And for those of you who don't know, Mitchell was an undrafted rookie this year out of East Carolina and was insanely productive in his last 2 seasons in college, totaling over 3,000 rushing yards and 23 rushing touchdowns, plus another 500 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air over his final 2 years. He also ran a 4.37 at the NFL Combine, posted a 38-inch vertical. He is like essentially a generic version of De'Von Achane, which easily makes him the most explosive back in this Ravens backfield right now. And if he continues to show that he is the best running back in this backfield, it's only a matter of time before Harbaugh starts to give him more work, especially if he's rattling off huge plays like he was this week against Seattle. Gus Edwards will still be involved as the grinder and the goal line guy, but Mitchell can easily fade Justice Hill out of this offense and become the RB1B in this Ravens backfield, similar to De'Von Achane with Raheem Mostert, or even like Jahmyr Gibbs with David Montgomery. He is absolutely a spend-it-all 100% fab pickup if he's still available in your leagues right now. The other running back that I want to highlight is Ty Chandler, not because of anything that he did specifically, but because Cam Akers once again appears to have torn his Achilles tendon, which is super unfortunate for him and what could have been with his career. But 2 Achilles injuries not only ends his season this year, but possibly his career as well. So in his stead, in this Vikings backfield, returning to the handcuff role for Alexander Mattison is Ty Chandler. And it's not a sexy ad like Keaton Mitchell, but it could be an under-the-radar one that you can sneak past your league mates if you subscribe to rostering handcuffs like I do in Dynasty. Now moving over to the wide receiver position, the big surprise of the day was Noah Brown, who totaled 153 yards and a touchdown on 6 receptions in this high-scoring Texans-Buccaneers game. Now, while you can argue that this was just a blip on the radar for Noah Brown, and I'm not totally disagreeing with you, I would just like to point out that Brown has seen 5 or more targets in each of his last 3 games with the Texans, and while that only led to 5.5 and 8.5 fantasy points in the 2 games prior to this week, 5+ targets is not a bad number to see on a weekly basis. That's 85 total targets over a 17-game season. Not to mention that Noah Brown has showcased his talents before, including being a top 30 fantasy wide receiver to start the year last year through the first 4 weeks, as like the wide receiver 2 for the Dallas Cowboys behind CeeDee Lamb. And while he may not have that much fantasy upside as the wide receiver 3 in Houston behind Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and potentially even the wide receiver 4 behind Robert Woods when he comes back, he is still a pretty solid stash at the back end of your Dynasty rosters. Speaking of solid stashes at the back end of your rosters, Dontayvion Wicks of the Green Bay Packers is also a really good one, who actually led the team this week in both targets and receptions against the Rams. Christian Watson left the game with essentially what was described as almost like an entire skeletal system's worth of injuries, which I expect to keep him out for a couple of games, if not more. So Dontayvion Wicks becomes a very interesting stash for the second half of the season. In fact, in 3 games without Watson to start the year, Wicks saw 12 total targets, 10 of which came in weeks 2 and 3, where he eclipsed 40 yards in both of those games and found the end zone in week 2. So again, he's not an immediate plug into your starting lineup kind of guy off of the waiver wire, but he's definitely a name to monitor and stash going forward with Christian Watson out. And then lastly, Dallas Goedert left the game early with a forearm injury, and the next man up on the Eagles depth chart is Jack Stoll. Now, we have a 4-game sample size from last year with Goedert out, where Stoll was the tight end 1 for Philly, and he averaged only 3.5 fantasy points per game. But he did have one game over 7 fantasy points. So there is a little bit of life here, especially at a position in fantasy that is such a crapshoot on a weekly basis anyway. Plus, we have bye weeks coming up for Jonnu Smith and Kyle Pitts, Hunter Henry, Mark Andrews, Dalton Kincaid, Cole Kmet, TJ Hawkinson, and Logan Thomas. And while most of those guys aren't the best names for fantasy at the tight end position, I am sure that there are many of you out there relying on those guys as starters because that's just the tight end position for fantasy football. So if Goddard is out for an extended period of time after their bye week, Jack Stoll might not be the worst ad in the world and could potentially be thrown in as a desperation start if you really, really needed him. Oh, but speaking of the worst ad in the world, please do not waste any of your fab on Tommy DeVito. I know it might be tempting with Daniel Jones most likely having a torn ACL and being done for the year, and Tyrod Taylor is also on IR for at least 3 more weeks, so it seems like DeVito is going to be the Giants starting quarterback for the foreseeable future. But I can just about guarantee you that you would be better off with any other skill player in your superflex spot than Tommy DeVito. Now, if you're in a straight up 2 quarterback league where you have to start 2 guys and you're that desperate, I would almost rather just trade that fab with a draft pick and go get like Josh Dobbs or Gardner Minshew or somebody else other than Tommy DeVito. It is not worth it at all to me to get him. This entire Giants team is terrible outside of Saquon Barkley. DeVito is terrible. It is just not worth it to me to spend any fab whatsoever on him unless you're absolutely getting him for free.
I come out, I throw trash all over the ring, and then I start eating garbage. And then I pick up the trash can and I...
But if you're a Dynasty football player and you are not subscribed to this channel, please do so, as we are continuing to drop Dynasty specific content all season long. And if you haven't watched it yet, Justin made a fantastic video about some aging veteran running backs that you might be able to buy cheap if you are a competing team, which you guys can check out that video right up here.